All right, I think we finally got it up and running. Yay! In case you're wondering, live stream is giving me fits, so I didn't know what's going on. So tomorrow, this weekend is kind of the weekend. A lot of places will end up celebrating Halloween. And although I don't really celebrate Halloween, we do have a fall festival at my church where we have like a carnival as a way to reach out to the community with bounce houses, and we give out gospel tracts and hand out a bunch of candy, and it's a nice, safe family place. So one of the reasons we do that as a way to reach out to the community and actually share the love of Christ. So we will do some outreach, and there will be a whole bunch of different things going on. So pray for the various activities. I realize that some places say, well, no, you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't have anything going on Halloween. But to me, it's an opportunity to reach out to the lost. And so if we wear costumes, and we don't normally, it usually has to be, one of the requirements is that all the people that work there have to wear biblical characters. I've gone as Moses once. But generally it's usually an orange shirt and has the church's name on it and an orange t-shirt. But anyway, to me, it's an opportunity to reach out. So with it being Halloween, and with it being coming up on Halloween, I thought a perfect way to tie this in and kind of end our series about Dead or Alive is to talk about fear. The reality is that we live in a world where there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of people who like to be afraid. But today, I want to look at how we deal with fear. And I want to deal with it from the point of view of what the Bible has to say about fear. The Apostle Paul is kind of the New Testament version of the unsinkable Molly Brown. Now, I don't know if you know who that is. I'm an old man, so I remember the verse. I remember the stories. Molly Brown was let's put it this way. She gained her name because she kept having catastrophe after catastrophe, and she'd walk away from them. And Molly Brown was on the Titanic. She's one of the few that survived. And so they gained that nickname, the unsinkable Molly Brown. Well, Paul simply refused to go down with the ship. Paul was actually shipwrecked 3 times. After one of the shipwrecks, he spent a full day, a day and a night, as he puts it, on the open sea. He was stoned, scourged 5 times, beaten with fists and rods and words. He'd been scorned, chased, scandalized, and slandered. He'd been the focus of riots and death threats, and after one harrowing near-death experience, he was snake-bitten. His focus, energy, and resilience were nearly frightening. In fact, the only thing that seemed to discourage Paul were the problems in his young churches. To read Paul's letters to those churches, one might come away with the idea that Paul was continually frustrated and that his work wasn't very successful. After all, those early letters were filled with corrections, some of them quite harsh. But in reality, Paul's work changed the world. In places like Athens and Ephesus and Corinth, the once powerful temples and the religion of the Greek gods that so dominated this culture are in ruins, and yet billions have and are reading Paul's letters, memorizing passages, and following the instructions as if Paul was still preaching his message in our culture. Compared to the nearly 44,000 who were killed in motor vehicle wrecks last year. We wring our hands over the mad cow pathogen that might be, but most certainly isn't, in our hamburger, yet worry far less about the cholesterol that contributes to the heart disease that kills 700,000 of us each year. Shoppers still look askance at a bag of spinach for fear of E. coli bacteria, while filling their carts with fat-sodden French fries and salt-crusted nachos. We put filters on faucets, install air ionizers in our homes, and lather ourselves with antibacterial soap. At the same time, 20% of all adults still smoke, nearly 20% of drivers and more than 30% of backseat passengers don't use seatbelts, and 2/3 of us are overweight or obese. In short, we choose some of the strangest things over to which to be afraid of. Why do we worry about things that we shouldn't? Bible knowledge is important. Don't get me, she said, little Johnny's a good boy. It said, if he says he didn't do it, I believe he didn't do it. Flustered, the pastor went to the Sunday school director and related the story to him. Director, looking worried, explained, well, sir, we've had some problems with Johnny before, but let me talk to him and see what we can do. But to tell you the truth, I really don't see he knocked down any walls. That afternoon, the pastor met with his deacons for the very first time. He related the entire story and his concern that a child, his teacher, and even the Sunday school director didn't know who knocked down the walls of Jericho. There was a silence for a few moments, and it was a very awkward one. Finally, the oldest deacon in the room stroked his chin and said, well, Pastor, I'll tell you what. I move we just take the money from the general fund to pay for the walls and leave it at that. Somewhere along the line, those guys had missed the point. They're missing one of the most incredible truths to be found in the Bible, the secret of being anxious for nothing. Not having to be afraid. Nothing really to be afraid of. In Acts 16, verses 25 through 33, we read the story of Paul and Silas. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns of God. They're in jail, and the prisoners were with his entire household that they had believed in God. I want you to think about that. That's a radical story, but Peter and Paul weren't afraid. They were singing. They were in jail, waiting to be tried, waiting to be whatever, and they're sitting there singing about it. Paul and Silas and Timothy reached European. They must have remembered the night when Paul and Silas had sung at midnight after the worst day they'd had in a long time. Paul probably visited Philippi a second time, but it was the first short visit that made the most powerful impact upon them. He modeled what he preached, choosing to rejoice at all times and saying no to fear. And that's what we, even when we're afraid, even when everything seems to be going against us. Okay? Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, faith in Christ is, he didn't know what he was going to do because he had spent a whole year with this guy and he had done everything. He threw out his stuff, he damaged his books, he short-sheeted his bed, he filled his bed with oatmeal one night. I mean, he did everything he possibly to make this guy miserable. And yet, rejoice in the Lord always, and again I say rejoice, became this guy's watchword. He loved Jesus, and he continued to try to love this guy through Jesus. You know what happened at the end of the school year? I'm going to tell you what happened at the end of the school year. This guy came to him, and he says, I got to tell you something. He says, I know I don't sound like, but I know that my God, that God is real to you. And you live out that faith every single day. And so what I wanted to tell you is this. Your faith is genuine. I'll be honest with you, I was so discouraged, I was so beat up after what they did to my dad that I just wanted to give up. I was ready to take my own life and go home and just give up. But I see Jesus in you, and I know that he's real. You can rejoice no matter what the situation, because the rejoicing doesn't come from your circumstances. It comes in your relationship with Jesus Christ. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You'll only be able to rejoice in a difficult hour if your relationship with God is real. Secure your foundation in Christ. Philippi was a city populated in part, like any religion-based, complicated, psychological wish dish of faking joy until you feel better. This is honest-to-goodness relationship with Jesus Christ that will so transform you, you'll sing in a prison, even if the prison is in Chicago. Lee Strobel was working on the Chicago Tribune without any intention of being caught up in the faith. He was, at the time, a hard-nosed, investigative atheist who didn't believe in God. Strobel's editors gave an assignment. He was to report on the struggles of an impoverished inner-city family during the weeks leading up to Christmas. He came to the Delgado family, 60-year-old Perfecta Delgado and her granddaughters, Lydia and Jenny, who had burned out of their roach-infested tenement and were now living in a tiny two-room apartment on the west side. Strobel said, as I walked in, I couldn't believe how empty it was. There was no furniture, no rugs, nothing on the walls, only a small kitchen table and one handful of rice. That's it. They were devoid of all possessions. In fact, 11-year-old Lydia and 13-year-old Jenny owned only one short-sleeved dress each, plus one thin gray sweater between them. When they walked the half-mile to school through the biting cold, Lydia would wear the sweater for part of the distance and then hand it to her shivering sister, who would wear it the rest of the way. The Delgado family had one thing that absolutely flabbergasted Strobel. In the midst of very, very difficult living conditions, they had joy. It wasn't a cheap kind of joy that laughed at every joke. It was a gentle joy that had hope and peace. There was no despair in this home, nor was there any self-pity. God, said the grandmother, had not abandoned them. Strobel completed his article, complete with Perfecta's confident faith in Jesus, and moved on to other assignments. But as Christmas approached, he couldn't help but think of the family with so much joy, even as they had so little. In fact, he wrestled with their attitude in the face of such emptiness. I continued to wrestle with the irony of the situation. Here was a family that had nothing but faith, and yet seemed happy, while I had everything I needed materially, but lacked faith, and inside I felt as empty and barren as their old apartment. Strobel found an excuse to visit the family again. When he arrived, he was amazed at what he saw. Readers of his articles had responded to the family's need in overwhelming fashion, filling the small apartment with donations. There was new furniture, appliances, and rugs. There were clothes, a Christmas tree, and stacks of wrapped presents. There were plenty of food, plenty of warm clothing for the girl. They even had a generous amount of cash donated. Of all the surprises of that second visit, however, nothing prepared Strobel for the biggest surprise of all. The grandmother and her granddaughters were busy wrapping gifts, giving away what they had been given to them. Why? Strobel asked. Our neighbors are still in need, said Perfecta. We cannot have plenty while they have nothing. This is what Jesus would want us to do. She waved at all the gifts. This is wonderful. This is really good, she said. We did nothing to deserve this. It's a gift from God. But it's not his greatest gift, she said, her words cutting to the heart of the reporter who claimed there was no God. No, we celebrate that gift tomorrow. The greatest gift God ever gave us was Jesus. You can't fake rejoicing in the gift of Jesus when you're in a tough spot. Even a hardened reporter would know that. And as Strobel left that tiny apartment where those with very little prepared to give away what they had, something in him longed to know the Jesus they knew. Eventually, Strobel met Jesus. Today he uses his reporting skills and his passion for Christ to write books that have been read by millions, and he rejoices. It changed him because he encountered the living Christ. What's the fear in a God who takes care of you like that, when you can rejoice no matter what the circumstances? It is not nearly as complicated as we've made it out to be. We need to develop the discipline to saying no to fear and no to anxiety. If you're anxious about an issue, you've been thinking about the thing that makes you anxious, if you'd like to stop being anxious, you have to intentionally think about other things. This will take a great amount of discipline, but Paul was crystal clear on his instructions in Philippians 4:8-9. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things, and then the God of peace will be with you. So when you face your fears, when you're coming against the things that seem to be attacking and trying to destroy you and doing everything you can to run you down, think on whatever is noble. Think about whatever is right. Think about whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable. If anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things, and then the God of peace will be with you. How many thoughts about rumors that aren't true have ruined otherwise perfectly good days? Think only on things that are true. What's noble? Think of it. What about right and pure? That leaves out things that are wrong and impure. To come to think about it, it would be a great move for any of us. Think about the lovely, the admirable, the excellent, and the praiseworthy. Think about these things, Paul says. The reality is that we develop the discipline of saying no to fear, saying no to anxiety. Stop worrying about it. You can't change it. Think about these things, Paul says. You want to conquer your fear, you want to rejoice, and again I say rejoice, then you need to plug into the relationship of Jesus Christ. Because it's the only place, Pastor said, you see your groom just before, focus on the aisle, second the altar, and then focus on the groom. You'll get through this. And just as she had been promised, she zoned in on the 3 simple steps. But imagine her dad's feelings when he heard her saying it over and over again as they got closer and closer as they walked down the aisle. I'll alter him. I'll alter him. I'll alter him. Silly story? Sure. Maybe just as simple to zone in to the positives, to reject your fears, and tap into a joy that soars above all circumstances and allows you to rejoice in any circumstance. Put it off. You've said no to fear. You've said no to anxiety. I'll alter him. God will alter us. He will change our fears to joy. There once was a man, said teacher Kevin Miller, who wanted to teach the sparrows in his garden to sing. The sparrows knew only chatter, no song at all, so he brought a canary with a beautiful song and hung its cage in the backyard. And there among the chatter of the sparrows, the canary sang. The birds sang and sang, but the sparrows only chattered. And because he didn't watch closely enough, the man discovered a sad truth a little too late. Within a very short period of time, the constant chatter of the sparrows so discouraged the canary that the bird lost its song. In fact, he knew only the raucous speech of the sparrows. You and I do not live in a vacuum. We are surrounded by birds of all kinds, and only a few of them know how to sing. But those who sing, they'll sing no matter the weather, no matter the circumstances, and if you fly with them, it will soar with them, and you'll sing too. Sing because your relationship with Jesus Christ. Sing because that's who you know. Sing and say no to fear. Say no to the anxiety. Say no to the worry. That will change you. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. Rejoice in the Lord always. And again, I say rejoice. When the fears come and they threaten to overwhelm you, put your mind on Christ. You know, we tell the story often of Jesus walking on the water. The reality is that we know the story, but I want you to think about it. The disciples went out to the sea. They were told to cross the ocean, right? And Jesus stayed behind so that he could pray by himself. And so he did. He stayed behind. And as he did so, storm arose. Where were the disciples? They were where God told them to be. They were out in the middle of the storm. And it was so bad that this group of hardened fishermen were terrified. In the midst of that storm, they look up, and here comes Jesus walking on the very thing they're terrified of. Are you afraid? Well, guess what? Jesus is in control. Jesus walks on the very things that you're frightened of. The waves mean nothing to him. He drones across them. The disciples were so afraid, and yet Jesus was trampling their fears under his feet. Don't you see? The reality is, no matter what it is you're afraid of, God is bigger than them. God is in control. And your fears mean nothing. Because you can rejoice in the Lord always. Why? Because you're in a relationship with Jesus Christ. Because it will transform you. And you can truly say, I don't have to be afraid. One of my favorite programs is a program called VeggieTales, and I know you guys have heard me talk about it. But there's a song in there, which I've been thinking about all day. And no, I'm not going to sing it. But it's called God is Bigger Than the Boogeyman. Apparently, Junior Asparagus is afraid of the dark. And Larry and Bob show up to teach him that God is bigger than any fear. There's no monsters, there's no bad guys, there's no nothing. God's not bigger than them. God is bigger than the boogeyman. He's bigger than the bad guys. He's bigger than the bad boss. He's bigger than the bad home. He's bigger than the bad attitudes. Because God is bigger than all of that stuff. And he loves you so much. And he desires to be in relationship with you. That's the God we serve. What a mighty God we serve. God is bigger than every fear you have. So when they start to haunt you, when you start to say, I wonder how I'm going to get through this, it's time to turn it over to God and say, God, I rejoice in you. Not because I'm so great or I'm so wonderful, because I serve a loving God who made a way for me when I didn't deserve it. And so as we deal with the scary stuff around us, our finances, our jobs, our homes, our family, God is bigger than the boogeyman. God is bigger than all of our pain, all of our sorrow, and all of our hurt. And you have nothing to fear. So you can say no to fear and anxiety. And know that there's nothing to worry about. Because it all is in His hands. Just like you are. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you. We so don't deserve your mercy. That's for sure. We fail you so often. We do not deserve you. And somehow, Lord, you choose to forgive us.